welcome everybody. So let's quickly touch on the agenda. So now what we're looking at today is B1 Usability Pack, which is a solution from Boyum. I think a lot of our clients are already using it. So this was, and we've done a number of previous webinars on this topic as well. So if you do want to sort of look back at what we have previously done, you can go to our YouTube channel and have a look at it. But today we were just more focused on looking at some very specific examples of how you could use B1UP, and some of those settings are fairly straightforward to activate. It's just a couple of checks or clicks and it's done. So we're trying to sort of just show you some of the things that can be rolled out fairly easily, and there are some features that are a bit more advanced. Might require a little bit of SQL or some scripting knowledge, and our team has quite an in-depth knowledge of the solution and can guide you there if required. So I mean, I guess probably to make a comment around this is that if you are not using B1UP, then you're probably only using 50% of SAP Business One's capabilities. It's B1UP with Business One does really make the solution sing and dance. So let's begin. So the first enhancement, a little sort of usability point that I'm going to look at is the ability to make fields read-only. So, let's say on a sale order screen, you have a number of fields, and maybe there are some fields that you just don't want people to be touching or playing with, even though you want them to be visible. There may be an actual use case around that. And so example here would be, let's say, the discount fields at the header level. I don't want people to be, updating these. Happy for them to see what's in there, but they shouldn't be putting discounts at a header level. How do I do that? Well, it's pretty simple. You just right-click on the form, you go into B1 Usability, and you go into Make Items Read-Only. And once you're in there, you can see all the different fields that are available on this form. And you can then, from here, pick the ones that you want to make read-only. So in our case, we're looking at the discount percentage and the discount amount. So I'll just go find those particular fields. And let's see, maybe it's easier to do that. So there it is, discount, edit, and there's the percentage. So I'll tick those two, and I hit the update button. And immediately those two fields are now grayed up, so I cannot enter the fields to make any changes. The field is completely unavailable to me, even though I can see it. So this only works if you are wanting to do complete read-only for all users. Now, if your requirement is that you want to make read-only for specific users and not for other users, then you have to do a usability configuration. It's not a simple right-click and make an item read-only. So depends on what your use case is, but in this case, the use case is that we just want to make the field read-only and keep it visible. All right, the next little tip here is around making items mandatory. So, for example, your customer reference number field. We want to make it mandatory, and I mean, there's a standard setting in SAP for this, but there may be other fields. But here's an example of how you do this. You simply right-click on the field, you go into B1 Usability, and you say, make this field mandatory. You click on that option, and it's already done it, right? So the field is now mandatory. I can click on the settings button to see what it's done. So there it is. It's gone in, made that particular field mandatory. I can make it so that the user only gets a warning if they don't if they don't enter any information in there. Otherwise, it'll block them. There's also some other settings here that says, you know, do we want to check during add? Do you want to check during update? Do you want to check during OK? And then you can also make, you know, the color of that field slightly different. So I can go select a color, and then I can make either the background or the actual front text a different color. So let's say I wanted to make the background red. And update. So now what will happen is when I open that screen up, by default, you know, that field is red. And if I did attempt to process an order without putting any information into that field, I get blocked. And you can see there's a message in my, you know, in the toolbar, in the message area, which says the following fields are mandatory. So in this case, there was only one field, which was the customer reference number. If there's multiple fields, then they will all be listed in there. Okay, so that's making things mandatory. The next one we're going to look at is, and this is a bit more advanced, so this is not just a right click and make setting. In this particular one, we're looking at dynamically changing text on the screen based on some information. So specifically what we're looking at is the delivery date field on a sales order, and how that text will change depending on what the delivery date of a particular transaction is, and the actual date itself and how it can be dynamically changing in terms of its color. So if I scroll back one record, you see here this particular order is due in 2 days, and so the actual label says delivery date, delivery due 2 days. If I scroll back one more, there's one that's overdue now. So it's supposed to be due 8 days ago, and it's showing that it was due 8 days ago, and the color of the date is now in red, telling us that there's a problem here. You know, we're 8 days late. We haven't delivered this particular transaction. So you can have these sorts of dynamic changes in labels and fields. If I go back further to one that's already completed, in that case, there's no extra bit of information next to the label, but the actual date field is green. So, you know, there's a few different ways of doing this. And so let's just quickly go through how this was set up. So, and in this case, it is, as I said, a bit more advanced. So there's a little bit of scripting involved. So first thing you have is what we call the validation. So there's an extra validation setup. So let me just go into the edit. And there's the one we're talking about, which is the overdue date. Okay, and so this is getting a little bit technical, but you know, for those of you who have some technical knowledge, you'll understand some of this. So this is form 139, which is a sales order. And how do I know that sales order form is 139? Because right at the bottom of the screen down here, when I have my mouse on the form, I can see that it says type form 139. So that's form 139. And then I'm saying that when I'm loading data, so every time I'm moving from one record to another, which is a data load event, and when it's successful, which is, you know, action is success, then we're doing a bit of a check. What are we checking? We're checking whether the date in this field, so this field here, which is our doc due date, How do I know that's date ID 12? Because down at the bottom here again, when I put my mouse on the field, it shows me that it's item 12. But also if I right click on this field and I go copy system information, it's telling me that's the syntax. It's 12. So what we got is where the date is less than current date, and this is now SQL syntax, then we return overdue, otherwise we're good. So what happens then? If it's overdue, then we've got to execute this particular function. If it's good, we execute this function. And so now let's look at the function itself. There's a function. Within that function, we're running and saying, well, if the document status is open, then set the color of the field to red and set the description of the field to have the actual number of days to go. And likewise, if the document status is not open, then set the date field to green and the label to just delivery date. So it is a little bit technical, but for those of you who may have some technical information, you'd be able to do this. And likewise, we have the other side, which is, it's just a standard thing. Then it becomes black, and the delivery date is whatever it is plus the future. Okay, let's now look at another tip, and this one is something that you can activate fairly easily. So if you're already using the B1UP dashboards, and if you're not, then I highly recommend that you look at activating this, because as soon as you activate it, you get a number of standard dashboards out of the box. You can see all these tabs across the page, all these different dashboards. These are all standard. These come out of the box with the system, and then you can make your own ones. We've covered this particular topic in some previous sessions, so I'm not going to spend too much time looking at how you do dashboards. But if you've got B1UP and you haven't activated this, then I would strongly recommend that you have a look at this. But what I'm more specifically interested in showing you is the calendar. So you've got the standard SAP Business One calendar, which shows you all the different activities you've got. I show you service couples and so on. But there is a enhanced calendar that comes with B1UP, and you'll see there's a little actual link that says you can try it. So I'm just going to try it. I click on that. And you could activate this to be a permanent thing, or you can say, I'm just going to try it. So let's try it. And so now I've got the calendar that comes with B1UP. It's showing you all the same things. It's showing me, my activities. But in addition to that, it also shows open documents that have specific due dates. So it's showing me that this sales order is due there, this sales order is due there. I can double click on it, go into the sales order. If I go back a week or two, I'll see here on this particular date, these 3 accounts receivable invoices are due. So it's quite visible, and it then gives you, the ease of drilling down into those transactions. And there are also various different views. So you can do a day view, which is similar to what which we would have seen with B1 with standard SAP as well. You can do a weekly view. You can do a whole week. You can do a month view. You can also do timeline view, which shows you, slightly different view of the information, where you're just scrolling across in time to see what things are going on. And then there are, other options as well. You also got the option to see other types of views. You can see a manager can see the employees, production manager can see production orders, service person, and so on. So it's probably worth exploring this particular feature if you're not using it. You can also put in the calendar and see and try and easily jump from month to month if required. Okay. The next little tip we're going to look at is inserting a tab on an existing screen. So in this case, the use case is I've got my business partner master, customers, and within that, I want to quickly see all my open sales documents. So you'll notice here that I've got an extra tab called Open Sales Documents, and within that, I've got a listing. Right, so it's showing me the different types of transactions. I can see there's 145 open deliveries, 156 invoices, and so on. And if I expand, I can see the listing from here. I can also drill in and see the actual underlying transaction. Okay, so this here is something you can set up. Now, there's two things you have to do in setting this up. One is you've got to write an SQL report that brings back the data, and then the other thing you have to do is use the item placement tool to insert this particular tab. And again, if you do a right-click B1UP, you've got this option to create a new tab. Once you've created the tab, if you go into the item placement configuration, there's an option here that says number of tabs added. I've got a tab. My tab is an SQL report. And, I can also position the tab and so on. And if I look at my SQL report, then there's the underlying SQL that I've written for the purpose of this. So I've got basically a union query that returns all the open documents of the different types. And then I've also got some additional configuration here to sort of set up all the drill downs and things like that. So that's the option to add more tabs to an existing form, and then dynamically populate that with information based on what data you're looking at. So if I'm scrolling between transactions, you'll see that the number of scrolling between business partner records, you can see dynamically the number of open transactions by transaction type is also updating. So you could have this, on an item master, you could have this on an invoice, anywhere, whatever's most relevant for you. Okay, so the next little tip we're going to look at is now you can embed SQL reports within the screen, but what you can also do is you can have buttons that call on SQL reports as well. So in this case, more relevant to suppliers. So let's say I want to see, when I look at a supplier, I want to see which particular items is this supplier the default supplier for. So I just got a button here that says show me the supplier items, and that gives me a listing of all the items where this particular custom supplier is my default supplier. I can go to another one and I go supplier items and I can see a different listing. So how do we do this? So in this case, I've added a function button to this screen. So in B1 Usability and edit function buttons. There's my function button. The function button calls a universal function, which in this case is an SQL report. And the SQL report essentially just returns a listing of items that where the supplier is the default supplier. So again, not overly complicated. You got to know how to write some SQL, and then you're just going to know how to sort of set this up. But yeah, this is probably a little bit more advanced in terms of setup. Okay, move on to the next one. So we want to sort of look at doing adding some extra menu items to your screen. So, for example, on the sales order, you want to be able to, let's say, generate a credit note very quickly for this sales order. So what I've done here is I've done a right-click option, and I've created a new entry in here called credit note. Right-click credit note, and that pops open the credit note screen pre-populated with this particular customer. So again, not overly complicated. This one, you go into B1 usability, and you say edit right-click menus. And in this case, I've added a new menu called credit note. Caption is credit note, and what does it do? It just opens up the credit note screen. Now, you can do something more advanced. You can sort of, instead of just opening up a basic screen, you can do a universal function, which may do all sorts of additional business logic and then return back to you. So this is just an example of something simple, but you can take this quite far. Now, the same thing we could do using a button, and you can see that there's a button on this screen as well. It says credit note, and I can click on that, and that results in the same thing. It opens a screen and pre-populates the customer. And how do we do this? So we have in the function buttons, we've got this, and it's pretty simple. You add a function button and say what do you want to do. You just want to open up a credit note screen. Right? You see there's a few others I've got here. I've got available to promise. If you guys are familiar with available to promise, that's a right-click option on the sales order screen. So you go right-click and then you go available to promise. Can get a bit tricky to find it sometimes. So what you can also do is put a function button. You highlight the line and you click on this button ATP, and that just opens up the same thing. And again, if we go back into the usability and edit function buttons, how have we done this one? In this case, it's calling a universal function. What's the universal function doing? It's just activating a particular menu, activating number 5961. How do I know it's 5961? Because if I go on the screen and I right-click and I go available to promise, at the bottom left corner, I can see the menu ID just down here. It's showing me that it's 5961. So it's just a way of shortcutting the right-click process. Another simple enhancement you can do is, I don't know how many would you be using, the opening and closing remarks that's available in the sales order. So you can right-click and say, enter opening and closing remarks. Now, once you've entered this in standard SAP, there's no way of knowing that those opening and closing remarks have been entered. You have to physically go in and check if there was a remark. So if you wanted to really use this, Boyum's got this nice little feature that will give you this icon if that particular transaction has an opening or closing remark. Okay, so as I'm scrolling through, that particular icon will show or not show depending on whether there is any opening or closing remarks. If I click on this, it takes me into the opening and closing remark. Now, how does this one get set up? Fairly easy. Right-click on the screen and go into the toolbox configuration. Now, the toolbox has a number of little configuration enhancements. One of those is a checkbox here that says use opening and closing remarks icon. And so you turn this on, and this will now apply to all the marketing documents, whether it's a sales order, a purchase order, all of those things. So it's quite powerful. Okay, the next option is the ability to import, export addresses on the BP master screen. Now that's, again, just to write, it's just a checkbox. There's a checkbox here called Use Address Copy System. If you turn that on, what you then can do is, you're on a BP master, and you go into an address, let's say my build to address, and let's say I now also have a ship to address that's the same as my build to address. And right click on that, and I can say export the address. Export the address, I come into my ship to section, go define new, right click, and I say import that address. Right, and it's already created it. Now, yes, standard SAP has this option here where you can click on this button, and it'll allow you to copy the build to address to the ship to. But it doesn't do it the other way around. If you had a ship to address and you wanted to turn that into a build to, you can't do that. But also, you cannot copy an address from one customer and import it into another, which is the case here. So I've moved to the next customer. I can still go in here and import the address and then make the changes. So this is a bit more powerful than what standard SAP lets you do. The next topic is journal remarks. So when you post transactions in SAP, there are some standard remarks that it generates as part of the actual transaction being generated. So the default is here. You go in, you pick the customer or supplier in this case, and you pick an item. And if I just right-click and say Journal Entry Preview, put a date in Journal Entry Preview, and by default, the remark is this: an AP invoice, and the supplier is V1000. Now, it's probably not very helpful. So when you're looking at, transaction journal listings, or you're looking at a supplier listing, it's not showing you a lot of information. So what you can do with the B1UP is you can enhance that. So again, right-click, go into B1UP, and go into Toolbox Configuration. And there is an option here called Use Journal Remark System. And within that, you can go transaction by transaction and define what the remark should be. So you can see I've customized the AP invoice one to say AP invoice, and then instead of the supplier code, I want to see the supplier name, and then I want to see the reference number, right? And let's just quickly look at the help here to see what other choices we've got. So we can use card code, card name, you can use document number, document date, payment reference, even description from the first line, which may be relevant for service type transactions, the type of document, and you can even do your own custom using SQL. So gives you a lot more power over what that does. So in my case, I've got the card name and then a reference. So when I add this particular invoice, so you remember that when we did the journal entry preview, it was showing AP invoice and then V1000. But once I add this, Boyum has intercepted that transaction, and now you can see, okay, I forgot to enter the vendor reference, so let's just do that again. There's my vendor reference number, and an item, and add. So if I come back and look at it, now you can see that it's got AP invoice, Acme Associates, and then the reference number. So it just gives you a lot more power over what you want to see in that remarks field. All right. Next enhancement is, again, a small one, just a checkbox to see the number of attachments. You see this here? It's saying attachments and 0. So if you're looking at a transaction, you don't need to really go into the attachments tab to see if there is an attachment. You can just scroll between transactions, and if there is an attachment, it will show you the number of attachments. And then if you go in, you can see what they are. So it just gives you more flexibility around getting, understanding what's in there without having to look into it. How do you do it? Again, it's just the toolbox configuration. And within that, the usability, here we go, show number of attachments. I mean, I'd urge you to sort of go through and look at all the different options that are available. The help is fairly good. If you hit F1, it will show you all the different options that are there and what they can and cannot do. I've just picked a few of these, but within this toolbox configuration, there are a number of little checkboxes that can make life easier. Okay, the next one is also a toolbox configuration, and in this case, it's the one that prevents the user from modifying the document address manually. And what I mean by that, so let's have a look. So let's say on a sales order, we pick the customer, and let's say the customer wants the items to be shipped to a different location. I click in here, the system doesn't let me go in anymore. So I've turned on this setting that prevents me from manually changing that address. I need to go in and type in the proper address with its components. Otherwise, what would happen is users would go in and type any random things. They don't follow the structure that you wish to follow, and you end up with maybe an incomplete or an invalid address. So this setting forces the users to create the address or update the address information properly. Okay, so that's the disabled documents address fields. If I click in it, it will open up that screen, and then you can update it from there. And that will then just update back on the front screen. You just can't change it on the front screen. Okay, the next little toolbox enhancement, again, you have to turn it on first, is the ability to add your own additional help. So this checkbox called use help information. Once you turn that on, you've got the ability to go into any field on the screen, right click on it, and now go into the B1UP and say add help information. I'll show you an example of this on my item master data. I've turned it on for the foreign name field. Okay, you'll see this little question mark. This is because I've added some extra help information. I can click on that, and then it shows me the help that I've got defined specifically for my business. So if you've got, user-defined fields, if you've got, you're using a field in a specific way and you want to give the user some information on how that field should be populated, simple as turning on the help system and then right-click add it, and then put your own text. And then you can still, of course, allow the user to open up the full help after that. So it's not restricting you, it's not taking over the standard help, but it's just giving you a bit more information. All right. The next enhancement we're going to look at is in terms of being able to open up a URL from within SAP. And specifically, what we're going to talk about here is being able to view the tracking number of a particular consignment or delivery directly onto the courier's website. Okay, so what have we got here? So going to the logistics tab. If you remember, there's a standard field called the tracking number. On the logistics tab on the delivery, there's a standard field. I've moved this so that it's sitting next to the shipping type. And then I've put a little button here called track. So what does that do for me now? So I mean, this particular one doesn't have a tracking number. So if I click on track, it's saying, well, first enter a tracking number. Makes sense. If I go back one, here you go. Here's one that has a tracking number. So I click on the track button. In this case, it's opening up the Australia Post website, and it's searched for the tracking number. Now, of course, tracking number I've entered is not valid, so it's saying it can't find it. But if it was a valid tracking number, then I would see, I would be in the Australian Post website with the correct tracking number. And now, if I go back further, and let's say I've got DHL, if I try to track this, well, I haven't got it set up, so it's saying the courier doesn't have a tracking service. But I mean, how have I done this? So let's just go through and look at how this has been set up. So right click, and firstly, I've put a new button. So I'm going to go into the edit item placement. And so what I've done is I've added a new box or a new button, and the button is called track, and I've placed it to the right of field number 121, which is my item that's showing the shipping type, and it's a button. So I've done that, and I've also moved the tracking number field so that it's sitting below that particular field. So I've done two things. I've moved that field, and I've also set a button next to my shipping type. But then, where's the logic behind this button? So I right-click on the button, go into B1 Usability, and then I can go and look at let's just maybe look at the configuration overview. So there it is, track. So when the user clicks the button, what are we doing? We're firstly going to check if it's blank, then there's no tracking. That's what I'm checking. I'm checking the field, this field here, which is field 251. If it's blank, no tracking. If it's no tracking, then well, I'm going to go and pop up a message saying, please enter it. Please enter a tracking number, please. Then I'm checking if the tracking number is 1 or 4, which is just the numbers on this particular list, as each one of them as an internal number. And so 1 and 4 are Australia Post and Australia Post Premium. If they're 1 and 4, then it's Australia Post. If it's 6, then it's Star Trek. Otherwise, it's no service. So let's look at what we're doing with Australia Post. Going to Australia Post, and it's basically launching a link. This is the link for the Australia Post tracking, and to it, I'm appending the actual tracking number that I've got, which is field 251. So basically doing that, and so when I click on the button, it's just launching that website appended with that particular tracking number. Okay, let's look at the next one. The next one here is how you can add other pop-up messages on screen based on certain conditions. So in this case, the simple example we're looking at is when I'm entering a sales order and I punch in a quantity, and if the quantity that I enter meets certain criteria, let's say the quantity I enter is greater than what I've got on hand, then I get a pop-up message. What is this saying? It's just saying you may not have sufficient stock to cover this order. So, and this can be used in a lot of different places. So every time you're adding a new item, or you sort of exiting a field, or you adding a customer, if you add a customer and the customer has some special comments, you can have a pop-up message. So this is an example of the types of messages you can get. All right, I'm on to the final one now, which is the company state. So, you'll generally have a test database, a live database, and maybe a sandbox database. And, I'm sure you've probably come across a situation where you've logged into the test and you've been working away and you forgot all about it, and you've done transactions that you should have done in live. You've done them in test. So how can you make it very clear and apparent to the user that they're either in a test database or a production database? Now this is through the config called company state. So under administration add-ons, B1 usability and B1 usability config, there's an option called company state system, right? So with this, you can make different company databases stand out more, so that demo, sandbox, and productions are easier to recognize. So what can I do? I can say, put a border on all the screens that open. So I can do a border on all the edges. What's the color of the border? Let's say it's red and white. What I can also do is say, show the state, database state in the main menu. So I can say, show the state. What should the state say? Well, in this case, this is my live database, and I want it in green text. So in your live database, you can do it in green text. In your test database, you can do it in red, so on. So update. And there it is, it's done. So now I've got a border around my screen, and I also got this thing at the bottom showing me this is the live database. I can go open up the sales order screen, and now I've got a border around that as well. So it becomes very clear, if you're opening up multiple screens, you're in multiple databases at the same time, you can quite easily distinguish between those.